Have you ever, like, felt this weird sense that there's more going on underneath, I mean, like, beneath the surface of, just regular everyday stuff?
Like there's like a whole other level to things.
Yeah, yeah. Like, what we see is just one tiny piece of the puzzle, and maybe there are all these hidden connections we're just not getting.
Oh, absolutely. That's a question that really keeps people thinking. I mean, thinkers and just curious minds in so many different fields.
Right. It's like it kind of hints at the whole journey we're going on today,
Sure.
because in this deep dive, we're going to be looking at some concepts that might at first sound like total sci-fi.
Yeah,
Right? Yeah.
yeah.
But the crazy thing is, when you start connecting the dots, it paints this surprisingly interconnected picture.
Yeah.
Like we're talking about the singularity, and not just in the sense of AI going all Terminator on us, but something even bigger than that.
Oh, wow.
Then there's this mind-bending observer effect from physics, which,
Mm,
like, whoa. Then this whole idea of an ether interface, which sounds super out there,
right.
and and even the idea that, like, going through really intense trauma can actually, like, change how you see the world.
Like it shifts your whole perception.
Yeah, it's wild,
It's a
right?
lot to take in, like a whole
Yeah.
collection of wild concepts.
It is. It is. And it all comes from this really thought-provoking conversation that I found.
Oh, cool.
Yeah, so we're diving into a YouTube interview with Clif High.
Okay.
Now, Cliff, he often talks about what he calls a sci-fi world,
Yeah.
but it's all in the name of trying to understand what he calls the event stream.
The event strip.
Yeah, basically like everything that's happening around us,
Oh, yeah.
all the events, the trends, everything, and his whole goal is to help humanity navigate it all. Make sense of the chaos a little bit.
So like find some meaning in it.
Exactly,
Yeah.
exactly. And it's a discussion that really makes you reconsider some pretty fundamental assumptions about how things work.
Like the basic rules of reality almost.
Yeah, yeah, kind of like that. So for everyone listening, our goal here is to take these sometimes really out there ideas and try to connect them, make them feel insightful, make them feel like, oh, wow, I hadn't thought of it that way before.
Like those aha
Right.
moments.
Yeah, exactly. But without making your brain feel like it just exploded.
Right, right.
So think of us as your friendly guides through some pretty fascinating intellectual territory.
Yeah, like we'll hold your hand through the weird stuff.
Exactly.
So what's our mission here? What are we trying to do with this deep dive?
Our mission, I'd say it's to extract like the really core insights from all this material. To give you, the listener, a shortcut to understanding these big interconnected ideas.
Give people a starting point, basically.
Yeah, starting point, and
Yeah.
hopefully spark some new ways of thinking about the world around us.
Cool.
Okay, so let's unpack some of this. Let's start with something Clif High talks about, his understanding of time
Okay.
and how it's like evolved over time.
Hmm.
He used to look at time in a pretty standard way, like most of us, months, years, decades. But he says the patterns he's seeing in his data, they don't really fit into those neat little boxes anymore.
They're more complex than that.
Way more complex.
Okay.
So what's different about how he's approaching time now?
Well, it's really interesting. He's moved towards identifying what he calls sets of information.
Sets.
Yeah, sets. And these aren't based on like calendar dates. They're based on these common words that pop up in his analysis.
Okay.
But the meaning of these words, they change depending on the specific set he's looking at. It's pretty wild.
So like the same word can have different meanings in different contexts.
Exactly. And he describes these sets as being connected by what he calls conceptual strings. And one of the first ones he identified was hypernovelty.
Hypernovelty. Okay, so what does that even mean? And how does it connect to this idea of discontinuity that he also talks about?
So hypernovelty, as
Yeah.
he explains it, it's basically like a period of super accelerated change
Okay.
where things are changing so fast
Yeah.
and genuinely new stuff is popping up constantly.
Yeah.
Things we've never seen before.
Like truly new, not just variations on the old.
Exactly. And discontinuity, then that's like the point where there's a clear separation, like a split in how people are seeing these changes.
Oh, interesting.
On one side, you've got those who are paying attention to like alternative perspectives, what he calls the woo.
The woo. Huh?
Yeah, like the more fringe ideas. And then on the other side, there are those who are stuck in what he calls the old paradigm.
The old paradigm. He calls that Griptology, right?
Yes, Griptology.
Yeah.
It's not exactly a word you hear every day.
Definitely not. So if we're connecting this to the bigger picture, what exactly is Griptology?
Okay, so Griptology, as Clif defines it, it's essentially a worldview that assumes matter exists independently of consciousness. It's like the classic scientific materialist perspective.
Right.
Like the idea that even if every single conscious being in the universe just disappeared, poof, the physical universe would just keep on trucking.
Okay. So that's the Griptology view. What's the alternative? Because you mentioned ontology.
Yes, ontology, and that's a completely different way of looking at things. It says that supreme consciousness is the fundamental reality.
Okay.
And that everything that exists is actually a part of or within this supreme consciousness. So basically, consciousness isn't something that just emerges from matter. It's the other way around. Consciousness is the source.
So like our thoughts, our awareness, it's not just internal, it's part of this larger interconnected consciousness.
Exactly. And it could be influencing the world around us in ways we don't even understand.
Whoa. That flips the script on how we usually think about things.
Totally. Like cause and effect gets a whole new meaning.
So where does this summer of emergence, which he says actually extends into fall and December, where does that fit in?
Right. So the summer of emergence it's the period he identifies as when this whole paradigm shift really starts to like take off in the public consciousness.
Okay.
It's when these concepts like the singularity, which remember he has his own specific definition of it,
Right.
and this ontological view of reality, they start to like dominate the conversation.
They become mainstream.
Yeah, more mainstream.
Now, let's talk about the singularity for a sec, because that's a term that gets thrown around a lot, especially when we talk about technology and AI, or artificial intelligence. But Clif is very clear that he's not talking about AI suddenly becoming self-aware and like taking over the world in the way that people like Elon Musk worry about.
Right. It's not about robots going rogue.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So what is this singularity he's talking about then?
He describes the emerging paradigm within this singularity as having three main parts.
Okay.
The eternal now, the event stream, and the ontology itself.
All right, break that down for me.
So the ontology, as we talked about, that's the supreme consciousness.
Got it.
The eternal now it's the idea that everything, past, present, future, it's all happening at the same time.
Oh.
Like in one giant perpetual present moment.
Okay, so no linear time.
Yep. And the event stream, that's the constant flow of interconnected events that happen within this eternal now.
So it's not just a bunch of random stuff happening.
No, it's all connected. Like a river, everything flows together.
Interesting. And he even brings up Terence McKenna's prediction about the singularity happening around 2012. Why does Clif think that this current time frame is more accurate?
Well, he thinks that McKenna's intuition about a big shift, that was probably right.
Okay.
But the timing, which was based on the Mayan calendar, it didn't take into account what Clif believes are the real driving forces. He thinks it's more about these deep shifts in our understanding of reality and maybe these longer cycles he calls Ubers. He feels this summer of emergence lines up better with those fundamental patterns.
Okay, so we're potentially moving into this singularity, and a big part of that shift is towards this ontological understanding of reality.
Right.
Now let's bring in this really trippy idea, the observer effect.
Oh, yeah.
We hear about that in quantum physics, but how does it fit into all of this?
It's fascinating. So the observer effect, it's this phenomenon where just observing a quantum system can actually change its behavior.
Like just by looking at it.
Yeah, and Clif points out that this effect has been seen in a bunch of scientific fields, not just physics. But the Griptology worldview, it can only describe it. It doesn't explain why it happens.
He was like, well, that's weird.
Exactly, but Clif is taking it way deeper.
So what's his explanation within this ontology framework?
He thinks the observer effect is like direct evidence of this supreme consciousness, the ontology, interacting with our reality.
Oh, okay.
And it does it through our individual consciousness.
Yeah.
Because, and he's very clear about this, we are only consciousness.
We are only consciousness.
Matter and even time, in this view, they're like illusions. They're just manifestations within this primary consciousness.
Whoa. It's a lot to wrap your head around.
It is. And that's probably why he thinks it might take years for this singularity to fully emerge, because it requires a huge shift in how we see everything.
Yeah, it challenges like our most basic assumptions about what's real and what's not.
Totally.
So this brings us to the idea of our participation in reality, what Cliff calls being part of the event stream.
Right.
He tells this story about a prediction he made about a Trump-Rogan interview
Oh, yeah, I remember that.
and how he realized he wasn't just predicting something outside of himself, he was actually, in some way, part of it happening.
It's like he was influencing the outcome just by focusing on it.
Yeah, that's the idea. And he brings in this analogy from his book, Brotherhood of the Afflicted, about the continuation of will and memory. How does that help explain our role in this ever-changing reality?
It's like, even though the world is changing so much, what he calls a schism from the world we were born into, there's this thread of our individual consciousness.
Okay.
Our will, our memories, that continues.
Like a through line.
Exactly. And he especially wants younger generations to understand that the world they're growing up in is different.
Very different.
And that this sense of continuity is really important to hold on to.
Amidst all the chaos, yeah.
Yeah.
So whether we realize it or not, we're all shaping reality. Now, Cliff talks about how his background in software, specifically this sensitization process he went through, helped him perceive what he believes is the ontology communicating.
Communicating how?
Through the event stream. Like, it's sending us messages.
That's interesting.
Yeah, so he thinks his work analyzing all that language data trained his mind to spot patterns and connections that others might miss.
He was looking for those subtle signals in the data.
Right. And he feels like that tuned his consciousness to be more receptive to what he sees as communication from the ontology.
Like he was picking up on a frequency that most people miss.
Exactly.
That's a cool way to put it.
And he even shares this personal story about looking for a house and this bizarre bison example.
Oh, yeah, the bison story. It's like the universe was sending him a sign.
That's exactly how he interprets it. Like these random coincidences, especially ones that connect to something he's been intensely focused on, they're messages from the ontology.
So he's basically saying there's no such thing as a meaningless coincidence.
That's the core of it, yeah. He believes the supreme consciousness created us as this living experiment.
To see what we view.
Yeah, to create new things, to experience things it couldn't have imagined. And that's where the phrase universe provides and guides comes in.
I like that. Universe provides and guides.
It's pretty powerful. But what about those who don't feel like they're getting these messages? What about people who don't feel like they hear universe? What does Cliff suggest they do?
Well, he's a big believer in intuition. He says that's our direct line to the ontology.
Okay.
Don't dismiss those gut feelings. He also recommends a practice called Japanese yoga, or Shinshin-do.
I've heard of that.
It's all about mind-body harmony, which he thinks is essential for connecting with the universe.
And becoming more receptive to those subtle messages, right?
Exactly. He uses this analogy of the body being like an antenna.
Oh, right. We have to tune it to the right frequency.
Exactly. And he emphasizes that our usual understanding of time with the past, present, and future, it doesn't really apply in this ontology framework.
Time is different in this view.
It's more fluid, less linear. He says the event stream unfolds based on our awareness, how present we are in the now.
So the more present we are, the more we can perceive.
That's the idea.
Yeah.
It's like, imagine time not as a straight line, but as this infinite point. Everything that ever happened and ever will happen is all happening at once.
Whoa.
And we experience time moving forward because our consciousness is focusing on different parts of this eternal now.
Mind-blowing. Okay, so Cliff shared these visualizations to illustrate our place within the event stream. He starts with what he calls the normie perspective. What does that look like?
The first visual, it's the typical everyday view of time, like a linear progression.
Okay.
Now is this fixed point moving forward, and we see ourselves as being inside this moving now.
Trapped in the present.
Yeah. And there's not much awareness of the bigger event stream. Stuff just seems to happen randomly.
It's like we're on a train and we can't see beyond the window.
That's a great analogy. Then there's the second visual, where people start to see themselves as being outside of the present moment.
Okay.
This often happens during big life changes or at certain astrological points, like the Saturn return.
Like a cosmic wake-up call.
Yeah, kind of. People start reflecting on their past, thinking about their future.
They see the bigger picture.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And the event stream starts to become visible in the background, but they don't fully grasp it yet.
It's like they're getting glimpses of the the landscape beyond the train tracks.
Yeah, but it's still blurry.
And he mentions car accidents and psychedelic experiences as events that can collapse time.
Intense experiences.
How do those lead to this altered perception?
Well, those experiences could be like a shock to the system. They break down our normal perception of reality in linear time.
They shake things up.
Big time. Like in a near-death experience, time can feel like it stretches out.
Right.
Or even stops. And psychedelics can really mess with your sense of time and space.
Yeah, I've heard stories.
He connects those shifts to the release of DMT and other hormones in the brain.
It's like they're rewiring the brain temporarily.
Kind of, yeah.
So the third visual shows the event stream becoming clearer, but it's still seen as something external and random. What happens when people operate from that perspective?
So at this stage, people are more aware of the event stream, and they might try to interact with it consciously.
Like with affirmations or something?
Yeah, or the law of attraction.
Yeah.
But they still see it as something separate from themselves.
Not fully understanding their own role.
Right. So their interactions can be what he calls exploitative.
Like they're trying to take advantage of it.
Yeah. And that can lead to what he calls karma.
Karma.
The energetic consequences that can cause the event stream to split or change in unexpected ways.
It's like there's a ripple effect.
Exactly. So even if you're trying to shape reality, if you're coming from a limited perspective, it can backfire.
And he talks about how people in power might operate from this viewpoint.
Thinking they can control things.
Yeah, without realizing their own interconnectedness.
And the potential consequences. He also puts practices like tarot and astrology at this level.
Interesting.
Like they're attempts to engage with the event stream, but they're still limited by the observer's perspective.
It's like they're using a blurry map. And finally, we get to the fourth visual, which is the most integrated perspective. Consciousness within the eternal now, embedded in the event stream.
That sounds pretty profound.
It is. There's no separation between our awareness and the flow of events.
Like we're part of the river, not just watching it flow by.
Exactly. And this is where he brings in his own psychedelic experiences, where he felt his ego dissolve.
Like his sense of self disappeared.
Yeah, and his consciousness expanded beyond his body, existing in what he calls hyperspace.
Whoa.
He felt this direct connection with the conscious event stream.
So for him, that was like a confirmation of this interconnectedness.
Absolutely. Now let's talk about something Clif believes is super important for all of this. Language.
Oh, yeah.
He thinks language is key to shifting from a Griptology to an ontology framework.
How so?
He says language isn't just a tool to describe thoughts, it actually comes from thought.
Yeah.
And it comes before manifestation in the physical world. So the words we use, they shape our understanding.
They frame our reality.
Exactly. And if we keep using words that are rooted in Griptology, it makes it harder to grasp the ontology.
Like we're using the wrong tools for the job.
Yeah. And he points out that the event stream doesn't follow our calendar time. So how should we be thinking about time then?
He talks about duration.
Duration.
Not as a fixed length of time, but as the perceived distance between our awareness and either a manifestation happening or a memory.
So it's subjective.
Totally. It's about the feeling of separation, not an objective point in time.
I see.
And he says, we should shift our language to reflect this more fluid understanding of time.
Like the way they talk about time in yoga or Shinshindu.
Exactly. That can free our minds from those rigid constructs.
Make us more creative and intuitive.
Yeah.
And he says using more accurate language about the event stream can help us understand potential timing and future events.
Like his prediction about the Trump assassination.
Yeah, he uses that as an example. He thinks the words we use carry specific energy. Vibrations, exactly. And by aligning our language with the ontology, we can potentially harmonize with it.
And maybe even influence physical manifestations.
He draws a parallel to the spoon-bending scene in The Matrix.
Oh, wow.
Like, a shifted mindset can have real power.
I like that.
And he contrasts that with what he sees as cruder attempts to influence the event stream.
Like spirit cooking?
Yeah, things like that.
Trying to manipulate things on a physical level.
Right. Now, he also addresses this concern that some people might have about social alienation.
Oh, yeah. People might think you're crazy if you start talking about all this stuff.
Exactly. But he argues that the benefits of understanding the event stream outweigh those social risks.
You gain more than you lose.
Exactly. And he uses his crypto predictions as an example.
Like tangible benefits.
Right. Real-world advantages to this new understanding.
So it's worth the risk of being a little weird.
That's his point. Okay, let's talk about anticipating the summer of emergence. Clif sees patterns of building and release tension in his data,
Okay.
and he ties this summer of emergence to Saturn's return to Pisces. What are some of the things he expects to happen during this time?
He talks about a lot of things. Aliens, government secrets being revealed, conflicts within the government, and a big push towards the ontological view.
Lots of upheaval.
Yeah. He even suggests that this ontology might become like a new spiritual framework for people.
Like a new way to make sense of the world.
Exactly. But he also mentions the possibility of culture wars and social unrest.
Because people are scared of the changes?
Yeah, he thinks people who are stuck in the old ways will resist. They won't understand what's happening.
It's like they're clinging to the sinking ship.
Yeah, and he talks about Reconquista movements, people trying to go back to the past.
That never works out well.
Nope. He also mentions potential problems with airlines and pilots.
Is he saying those are deliberate or natural?
It's a bit unclear. He says there could be natural things happening, like changes in electromagnetic fields. But he also doesn't rule out deliberate actions, maybe to restrict travel. He connects it to stuff like chemtrails and suppressed alien tech, too.
It's like there's so many layers to this.
Yeah, it's complicated.
Another big concern is the financial system.
That's a big one.
He talks about fake money and how the official reports don't reflect reality.
Yeah.
He even mentions silver going way up in price.
Silver.
Yeah. He thinks traditional financial analysis is failing because it's all based on Griptology.
It's using the old rules for a new game.
Exactly. And he sees the creation of all this extra currency as like a huge imbalance.
That's got to have consequences.
He thinks it will. He thinks fiat currencies will crash and tangible assets like silver will become super valuable.
Makes sense. Silver is real. It's tangible.
That's his point.
What about Catherine Austin Fitts? He's mentioned her before.
He did. He says their disagreement is about paradigms, not personal.
Oh, okay.
She's still working within the old financial framework while he's looking at things from this ontological perspective.
So it's a fundamental difference in how they see the world.
Exactly. He thinks the old rules of accounting don't apply as much when reality itself is changing.
Right. If the game is changing, the old strategies won't work.
Precisely. He also mentioned potential chaos at military bases and political unrest, maybe even violence against figures like Obama.
That's disturbing.
It is. But he sees it as a possible outcome of the breakdown of the old paradigm.
Like a backlash.
Yeah, a backlash against the old power structures.
It makes sense, but it's still scary.
He also predicts the suppression of silver will end.
Because it's artificially low right now.
Right. He thinks all that fake money will make silver's true value undeniable.
It'll break free.
That's the idea.
Yeah.
And then there's this wild idea of pirates emerging.
Pirates, like on the high seas.
Not exactly. He's talking about people operating outside the law, trying to get their hands on advanced tech.
Like stealing it.
Maybe. He's talking about tech that was created illegally or unconstitutionally, potentially even alien tech. So in his view, if the old laws don't apply anymore, these pirates might emerge.
It's like a Wild West scenario.
Yeah, kind of. And finally, he talked about his emotional tension chart, which shows these high levels of tension recently.
Okay.
But he emphasizes that it's a potential future, not a set prediction.
We still have choices.
We do. It's all about how we respond to the events unfolding around us.
So what are some key takeaways for the listeners?
Pay attention to your intuition. Those little nudges, those gut feelings, they might be messages from the ontology.
Don't ignore them.
And remember, your energy, your awareness, it all matters. You're not just watching the event stream. You're part of it.
We're all co-creating this.
And here's a final thought to leave you with. Think about a recent coincidence in your life.
One that really stuck with you.
Yeah. Now, consider what it might mean in light of everything we've talked about today. How is your consciousness shaping your reality? Thanks for taking the deep dive with us.
Yeah, thanks for listening, everyone.